Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy just to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. Welcome back to the Stressless Eating Podcast. I am super pumped for our guest today. Her name is Lauren Buck. She is an expert. She is an expert on all things mommying and how to be a better version of yourself and really have it all without sacrificing your life while being a mother and the parenting conversation, all that. But really, it stemmed from learning how to manage herself and become a better version of herself. So we're going to talk about all things that are relevant to you, whether you are a mom or a mom of yourself. So first of all, welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks so much for having me. It's so great to be here and talk about all my favorite stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you all are in for a treat. So first off, just give us a quick overview about, who you are, what led you to do the work that you're doing, and just kind of share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Lauren Buck. I'm with the Fully Present Mom, and that is a company or an organization that I started because when I became a mom, which was 8.5 years ago now, I had already been a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, meditation teacher for a long time. And I worked with people who lived high stress lives. At the time I lived in New York and I worked with a lot of, corporate bankers and people like, people who worked on Wall Street. And this was during the meltdown of 2008. So I thought I knew massive levels of stress and helping people reduce them. And to be honest, when I became a mom, I was actually quite arrogant. I was like, I didn't know that at the time, only in retrospect, but I was like, I've been practicing this stuff for years and studying it. I am so prepared. This is going to be easy breezy. I hear it's hard. I hear it's stressful, but I'm going to be able to handle it. Blah, 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 blah. Had my son, love him to death. Oh my God, I was so unprepared, and I just could not believe the levels of stress that I was experiencing and how it was impacting my ability to connect with my son. I wasn't able to have, in the beginning, I wasn't having the connection and the experience of mothering that I dreamed of, that I wanted, and I knew something was amiss. And so I went back and I did more training, more studying. I really committed myself because I knew what kind of change was possible. And initially I was doing my same yoga therapy stuff with moms. And then I realized, through my own experience, we have to go deeper. We have to work on the level of, I still use yoga therapy, and it's not that that's not useful, but I went beyond. So it's about not just working with the physical body and the breath, but using those as tools to work on the level of the nervous system and the mental emotional patterns and the belief and the relationships and how you show up in that relationship with your kids and what a game changer that can be. And so over the years, as I've worked with lots of different parents, I found that even with moms who are experiencing a lot of anxiety or a lot of anger or frustration or constant irritation with their kids, and this is not who I am. Why am I feeling this way? Or even just it appears to you that you have this obscenely difficult child compared to these other kids that you see. My own son is diagnosed with ADHD and dysgraphia. He has some challenges that because you're changing how you show up in the relationship, your child starts to change before your eyes. Of course, your child isn't actually changing, just your perception is changing. And that is what allows you to change your relationship.
Yeah. And when you show up as a much more calm and present, grounded version of yourself, I would imagine that how your child reacts does change.
Oh, absolutely. For a number of reasons. Number one, that's true in any relationship with adult humans, but it's doubly true with kids because their nervous systems are immature and yours is mature. Yeah. Well, more mature.
Absolutely. Right.
It's about to get even more mature,
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Well, I love how you're bringing in the nervous system. This is one of the reasons that you and I have always connected, even though we're talking about different spectrums of health, we always just seem to align on our beliefs around it. And because it's very nervous system focused. So that being said, like, I'd love to talk about self-care is a term that's kind of thrown around a lot nowadays. It's very in vogue, and people either really cling to it or they kind of brush it off as like, that means bubble baths and manicures. And it's so much more than that. It's the physical, it's the mental, the emotional, the social, the spiritual, all of it. So, and of course, the nervous system needs care. So I'd love to hear, when it comes to self-care, because you do a lot of self-care for moms, and defining what that really means. Like, just share a little bit about your thoughts on the whole self-care movement and what that looks like through your eyes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you could say a lot of my clients have described what I've done for them is to teach them how to do self-care, and then they qualify it like real self-care, and to put it in terms of the nervous system. I'm sure that your audience is, because they're listening to you, they're already well versed on the autonomic nervous system and how there's these two branches. You're always either in fight or flight in sympathetic mode, or you're in relaxed and groovy, which is parasympathetic mode.
Yep.
And rest and digest, as it's called sometimes. So you're always in one of these two modes. And a lot of times self-care, we think of it, especially with parents, is that it's a practice that you do. It's something that you do to take the edge off of the effect of being in stress mode a lot or often. That's where and there's nothing wrong with pedicures and massages and bubble baths, that those can be very effective at taking the edge off of the effect, the very real effect that happens on the level of your body, on the level of your emotions, and on the level of your thinking from spending too much time in stress mode, because stress mode is meant to be a temporary mode. We're meant to be in parasympathetic most of the time, but because very few of us live that way, especially parents, because the stressors are real.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what real self-care is. I think when you practice self-care that way, that's when it becomes something else that's on your to-do list. You know what I mean? It's almost, it becomes a stressor in itself. Like, I'm supposed to get up and meditate, or like,
totally.
I scheduled this manicure for myself. I've got to hurry up and get there so that I can relax, because I've got all these other things packed in today, and damn it, I'm going to have some me time, and it's not, the reason it's not real self-care is because it's not changing the fundamental pattern that's keeping you stuck in stress mode.
Yeah.
Real self-care, to me, the way I define it, is a practice that you do that starts to change the fundamental pattern of how you show up default, your default show up with your relationship. Yeah. So when I show up to relate with you, Leanne, you're my friend and colleague, or I show up to, my default mode to show up with you is relaxed and groovy. That's very easy. And that's true for a lot of parents who, especially in my experience, people who become parents a little later, in their 30s or even late 30s or 40s, they're so used to dealing with adults. They're so used to dealing with people who play by the same rules that they play with, and they can negotiate that world and feel like they have a certain amount of control. Enter a child who's fresh on the planet, does not play that rule by those cultural rules, hasn't learned them yet, doesn't care, has an immature nervous system, huge emotions, and it turns out you actually can't control this. Yeah. You can if you're willing to break the child's will, but as most of us wake up, more of us wake up to this new paradigm of parenting. Sometimes it's called peaceful parenting, gentle parenting, conscious parenting. We want to parent in a way that's different than the way that many of us were parented. Yeah. Not with a heavy hand, not with punishments, whether it's spanking or emotional manipulation, or we don't want to use those tactics, but we don't know another way to be in control, and so that's so stressful. It's so world rocking. And so the way that I show up with my kid, the default way is I'm either irritated or very prone to irritation, or I'm anxious or I'm very prone to anxiety. Thoughts like I'm screwing my kid up. They're going to wind up in therapy. Your mind is playing out way into the future, and you can't be present. You're not showing up in your default way with your kid in this relaxed and groovy, open, loving, parasympathetic state. And real self-care is changing that so that you're not trying, so that what the difference is, this is probably the best way I can explain it. Instead of being stressed out, whether that defaults to angry and irritated and frustrated or anxious for you, instead of showing up stressed out and then trying to take the edge off of that and switch into a love-based way of relating with your child, real self-care allows you to just show up open and love-based. And occasionally you will experience, it's not that you will never experience stress or irritation or anxiety again. It's just that that will be a temporary experience that you know how to handle and is no longer, the stress itself is not a threat to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's not like this thing that defines you. You know it's temporary. There's a peace around it. There's space around it. It's allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's huge too, because people don't understand that until they do, that the nervous system is this trainable, pliable thing. And what happens is when we're living in that sympathetic branch of our nervous system all the time, we have no choice but to be in that reactivity. It's what that nervous system, that branch of the nervous system's job is. You're reactive, right? And so it's not about doing self-care so that you just like put a Band-Aid on the reactivity. It's about practicing a way of being that you wish to enhance and become more of your default. It's about shifting the actual default state of your nervous system so that it's not that you'll never react, but you'll react less and less. And when you do, you won't go off the deep end and you'll be able to come back a lot faster. And every single time will just be a lesson and data of like, oh, wow, that was a reaction. Here I'm coming back to myself. And you can literally like change your personality almost from like anxious and reactive to peace and grounded and calm and not, you know, again, not that nothing will ever break through that bubble, but you'll be so much more proud of how you deal with it when it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. The word I like is, I used to use the word practice more, like you can practice this stuff in your nervous system, but I like the word trained because that's really what you're doing. You're showing up. Self-care is training. Yeah. You're showing up to train your nervous system so that you can be not the sum of all your past experiences that has led you to this moment, the habits, conscious and unconscious, that you've picked up and built up and unconsciously practiced to make you into who you are this moment. But you get to choose. Yeah, you get, and that's what coaching is. And if I could just touch on this for a minute, because this is a question that comes up: the difference between, as far as how it relates to parenting, especially the difference between coaching and therapy. There is a place for therapy, absolutely, and it is for. And some therapists, to be clear, do coaching as well. Yeah. But the place for therapy, in my opinion and in my experience, and I have a high reverence for it, is to help you heal trauma from the past that's affecting your present. Yeah. Right? Coaching is about identifying who you want to be, how you want to be showing up with your kids, getting a very clear vision of what it is that you want to create, and then aligning yourself right now with that. It has little to zero to do with the past. You know? Absolutely. So the beautiful thing is you get to choose. It doesn't need to be, you want to base your default, how you're showing up with your kids, based on your choice of who you want to be, not based on the experiences of your past. Yeah, absolutely. And that is, we just did a podcast episode about why most therapy doesn't work for disordered eating and the body image struggle. Because you're right. It's a very right now circumstance. And a lot of us have psychoanalyzed the problem to death. We don't need to go back in the past any longer. Right. You know, and we don't need to retrace those. Exactly. The question is it helpful? And again, I think the exception is like, real trauma. Like if it's held in the body, it can be healed and it can be released, but that is not necessarily going to get you where you want to go. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Great distinction. What are some of the beliefs that come up with your moms, about not being able to make time, or they need me more than I need this, or this isn't important, or, I can't make this a priority right now. I have to work, or I have kids, or whatever. Like, what are some of the beliefs that come up in the work that you do, and what are some alternatives? Yeah. So I think the biggest one that's at the root of a lot of the beliefs that you just rattled off, which are bang on. Big one is, I don't have enough time for this. This isn't a priority right now. There are other fires we need to put out that are more important. Like, people literally need to be fed. Butts need to be wiped. That's the priority, right? But at the belief that's underneath all of this is that a good mom sacrifices herself, and that is such a cultural myth that there's so much buy-in to. Yeah. And so I want to take a minute to address that, because if you believe that a good mom sacrifices yourself consciously or unconsciously, and most of us listening to this podcast probably only believe it unconsciously, but I know there's heads out there nodding like, yeah, I feel that. At the very least, like, even if I'm prioritizing my self-care, I feel like I'm going to get judgment from others, I just had a session with a client last week, and she was, and she's a rock star of this, she's like moved on and is like, teaching other people now. And she was in a situation where she was having not problems with her kids, but problems with her father, because she wanted to ask him to watch her kids while she did something that was self-care related, that wasn't like work. It wasn't an errand, wasn't a doctor's appointment. It wasn't like a real concrete thing. Yeah. And it was getting in the way of her relationship with her dad. Yeah. Because she was projecting all of these objections that he was going to have, that she wasn't spending her time well or something, when ultimately, that was her shame that she was carrying around. Yeah. That a good mom sacrifices herself, and she's not doing that. In a big way. And she's asking someone who raised her in a different generation, who's knee deep in that belief, probably, so it affects the best of us, even if you've done a lot of conscious work to unwind a lot of this stuff. At the heart of it, a good mom sacrifices herself. The problem with this is that in some cases, a good mom does sacrifice herself. Right? If my house is on fire and I have the choice to get myself to safety, easy peasy, or to go back in and get my son, I'm tearing up just thinking about this scenario. I'm freaking going back in the house and getting my kid. There's just no question. Of course. I would sacrifice myself to save him. There is no question. The important distinction here is that's a freaking emergency. That is a fight or flight situation. An appropriate fight or flight situation. That fire is not going to rage on for the rest of my life. That fire is a discrete thing that's going to end either when the house burns down or the fire department gets there. Yeah. And then it's over. And then my work is to relax and return to a state of love-based, not stress-based, but love-based, parasympathetic way of being. Yeah. The problem is when you carry that belief into your whole life. Then your whole life becomes an emergency. Then every interaction you have with your kid feels like a life or death thing that you need to win, that you need to keep yourself safe. And you're constantly worried about protecting yourself. You can't just sacrifice yourself. And this shows up in all kinds of cliches and adages that we have now. You can't drink, you can't give from an empty cup. You can't teach what you don't have. You can't teach your child to relate to other people in a love-based way if you yourself are not feeling love-based when you interact with your kid on a daily basis. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you're not in the practice of that, you have to train it.
Totally. And it comes back to that training conversation. And it ends up being this either or conversation where it's like either they get taken care of or I get taken care of. And that, like you said, in these fight or flight emergency situations, like that is absolutely, no one is going to ask you to pick yourself over your child, but that is not a long-term strategy. In fact, that is what causes a lot of moms to be in this suffering where they end up then resenting their husband, resenting their kid, resenting themselves. Like it's not a long-term strategy. And that being said, I'd love to talk about, what is the cost of that belief, in terms of coping mechanisms that you're seeing. Like we talk a lot about how there's a lot of the same firing and wiring that's going on in the brain where you're, turning to sugar or food to numb out or comfort or stress or emotionally eat or suppress or whatever. But it's the same mechanism that's going on when it comes to Netflixing and mindlessly scrolling on Facebook and online shopping and any type of thing where we comfort numb. So what does that show up in terms of coping mechanisms where you see when it comes to parenting?
Yeah, it exactly what you're talking about. All of those, which by the way, lots of those are referred to as self-care, by the way.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
I'm going to watch an entire season of Ted Lasso. That's my self-care tonight.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love Ted Lasso. But there's a difference between, or even like a treat or food, which is totally your area. There's a difference between enjoying something and being present with it and using it to distract you, to numb you from the constant stress that you're feeling. Yeah. So what happens is you have a belief like a good mom sacrifices herself. That starts to become your MO. And even when it becomes your MO and you're constantly, you're training that. You're training it more and more and more and more every time you practice it. And then it starts to become your identity.
Yes.
And after years of this, not only does it lead you into unhealthy coping mechanisms like overeating, like over binging, and those start to take a literal toll on your psyche and on your body. Mm-hmm. Now you're creating other problems to solve because you don't have command of your attention anymore. You start to have problems hormonally or with your digestion or putting on weight or whatever it is. Not only do you have these extra layers of problems that are on there now, after years of this, that's when you run into this, I don't know who I am anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's not, or I've lost myself.
Yeah.
It's because you haven't met yourself in so long.
Yes. And this is who you think you are.
You haven't met yourself in so long because you've been practicing this way of being that is not who you are. And by you, I mean impersonal you. Like, first you have to be a good human. You have to be a good animal, and the animal kingdom, a beast doesn't practice self-martyrdom repeatedly. When any animal gets into fight or flight, they experience it. And then, watch your dog, they shake it off. They shake their body, they shake it off, and they do what they need to do to return to a peaceful state.
Yeah.
And if you've been practicing it for a long time in your life, and you've even layered on these other coping mechanisms to help distract you from the fact that you've been living a way that is not who you really are.
Yeah.
It's going to take a little more than a shake off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Retrain yourself. But this is coming back to your point about the nervous system is plastic. It's trainable, it's adaptable. It's your birthright.
Yeah.
To take it back to what you choose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is so good.
So cool and so empowering to experience and to witness.
I know. And I love how you brought in the topic of identity. And that's what I want to bring you back on for part 2 on is the identity side of all of this, because there's the ways of being, but also, you and I have talked about this before. I work with so many moms that when they are no longer moms, like their kids grow up, they leave the house. It's like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Yeah. And their identity is completely transformed. And so it's about knowing how to adapt and find yourself and see yourself and all that. And so I know we have a hard stop, but first of all, is there anything else that's on your heart right now? And also let us know where they can find more about you. And then we're going to be having you come back for part 2 of this as well. So share anything that's on your heart before we wind down.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such an awesome conversation, and I always love talking with you. I have things on my heart, but I'm going to save them for part 2 because I'm feeling that some of them are going to be covered in the identity conversation. Okay. And I don't know if this will be released before part 2, but if people have questions and they, cruise in, or feel free to ask me questions, you can always reach my email is lauren@fullypresent.mom. So not .com, but .mom. And that's my website as well, where you can find me, fullypresent.mom.
Awesome.
And we'll get into identity and some other good stuff in part 2. Thank you so much for having me on, girl.
Absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes to get a hold of you. Thanks you so much for being here, and look forward to having you back for part 2 because that's a big topic that needs to be discussed. And ladies, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on the next show. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com. And sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good. But without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out there for you in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.